The moment that sentence cut through the air, it was as if an invisible crack split the entire first-class cabin. You do not belong here. Just 5 words, yet sharp enough to tear through the polished atmosphere, Sky West Atlantic guarded like an unwritten law. And under the weight of every stare, slicing toward him like cold steel, Andrew Cole sat motionless, his hands resting lightly on the armrests, his gaze unwavering by even a fraction. He looked straight at the blonde flight attendant, Rebecca Harlow, who stood before him with the quiet arrogance of someone who believed she had the authority to decide who was allowed to touch this exclusive world and who was not. The warm gold cabin lights sharpened the chill on her face, but it was the silence between them that tightened the entire cabin like a violin string on the verge of snapping. Rebecca gripped her radio, her voice sliding out like the edge of a blade against metal. Fraudulent passenger, in seat 1, Charlie requesting support. Silence. Then whispers flared like sparks hitting dry grass. Tyler Briggs, the young male flight attendant nearby, folded his arms and let a smirk curl unmistakably across his lips. Doesn't look first class at all. One sentence, and suddenly passengers leaned in, hungry, suspicious, eager for drama. Yet Andrew didn't speak. He did not protest. He did not justify himself. He simply inhaled slowly, deeply, as if anchoring himself in the center of a storm, built entirely from prejudice. That calm, quiet but cutting immediately unsettled a few observers. There was something about him, something that did not match the profile of a fraud. A stillness like the surface of a lake, hiding an earthquake beneath. In Andrew's mind, old memories surged like winds striking his chest. At 20, he had been expelled from a business-class lounge, despite having all required documents, because he did not look the part. At 30, he stood at a check-in counter, watching an agent call security to verify the legitimacy of his ticket. At 35, he was told to present additional paperwork for safety reasons, while the white man ahead of him was waved through with a polite smile. These memories had not made Andrew a man quick to anger. They forged him into someone who knew how to wait for the right moment to speak the right line. And today he was sitting on his own flight. What Rebecca and Tyler did not know was that Andrew Cole, in his simple grey suit, unbranded black shoes, and neatly kept salt and pepper hair, was the chief executive officer and largest shareholder of Sky West Atlantic Airlines. He was not merely a first-class passenger. He was the man who had written every rule in the service handbook they were now choosing to ignore. But Andrew did not reveal that. Not yet. First class hung heavy with tension, like the air before an explosion with no clear direction. A young passenger, Emily Carter, quietly lifted her phone to record her eyes, filled with restrained anger. "This is wrong," she whispered, soft enough, for only her seatmate, yet loud enough to make Rebecca whirl around, eyes flashing. "Recording is not allowed." "And you," Emily replied, still holding her phone, "are not allowed to treat anyone like that." Tyler let out a short laugh, dripping with mockery. Kids these days love playing hero. But the laugh died almost instantly when Andrew finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, cold as tempered steel. "Check my name." 3 words. Simple. But they struck the cabin like a judge's gavel. Rebecca froze for a heartbeat, confusion breaking through her irritation, before she forced her expression back into defensive annoyance. "We do not need to check anything." "I already told you you do not." Bell Andrew raised his eyes. One look. Just one. And the rest of her sentence died in her throat. In that single moment, the cabin shifted. A few passengers traded smirks for curiosity. Others who had sided with the crew began to hesitate. No one knew why, but everyone felt it. Something about this man was not what it seemed. A final wave of memories drifted through Andrew's thoughts. Closed lounge doors, questioned tickets, those eyes telling him he did not deserve to occupy their space. And he thought perhaps today was the day to end that cycle. Rebecca tightened her grip on the radio, her voice sharp as wire. Security team prepared to remove the passenger from the aircraft. The entire cabin held its breath. A mother pulled her child closer. An older man in row 2 shook his head slowly. Emily whispered, "No, this can't be happening." In the center of the chaos sat Andrew, still upright hands, resting calmly back against the leather seat. His eyes steady like someone who already knew exactly how this would end. He was waiting for just one moment. He slipped his phone from his jacket pocket, moving so slowly Rebecca assumed he was trying to call for help. But Andrew simply spoke softly, almost like a breath, yet somehow reaching every ear in the cabin. "Rachel, activate Protocol 9. And the cabin erupted into a silent explosion. The crew looked at each other in panic. Passengers stopped breathing. Emily's mouth fell open. Then a composed female voice echoed through Andrew's phone, amplified enough for all to hear. "Understood, Mr. Cole. Protocol 9 activated. The executive board has been notified. All audio within the cabin is now being recorded." Whispers crashed like a storm. Rebecca blanched. Tyler swallowed hard. A man in the corner gasped, "Cole! Andrew Cole! Wait, isn't he?" Every gaze in the cabin snapped toward the man who still sat perfectly still. The cabin lights caught his face, revealing the calm confidence of someone who had prepared for this moment long before any of them boarded the plane. And in the span of one heartbeat, SkyWest Atlantic Airlines realized the unforgivable mistake they had just made. They had insulted the man who owned the very plane they were standing on. Andrew lifted his head, eyes sharp as ice, ready to speak the sentence that would bring the entire first-class cabin crashing down. The moment the name Andrew Cole echoed from the phone's loudspeaker, the first-class cabin froze in place. No one spoke, but everyone understood instantly that what had just been revealed was not merely an identity. It was the authority of a man under whose will this entire airline operated. Rebecca Harlow, who moments ago stood ramrod straight, as if she ruled the entire front cabin, now trembled so visibly that the radio in her hand nearly slipped from her fingers. Tyler Briggs lost every trace of his smug smile, his eyes darting between Andrew and the phone, as if praying this was all some kind of mistake. But then Rachel Donovan's voice sounded again through the speaker, sharp and metallic. "Mr. Cole, I am logging every statement from the crew. The executive board requests confirmation. Do you require the flight to be paused for intervention?" One single question, yet heavy enough to crash onto the cabin, like someone had dropped a concrete slab in the aisle. A businessman in seat 2. Delta muttered, "My God, he really is the chief executive officer." An older woman whispered, Is this his airline?" Andrew tilted his head slightly, and that small movement alone made Rebecca instinctively step back. Captain Raymond Pierce, having heard Rachel's voice through the internal comms, yanked open the curtain and stepped out. His face shifted from formal authority to a bloodless pale in seconds when he laid eyes on the man he had just threatened to remove from the aircraft by force. "You who did you say you are the captain?" Managed, though, the question was swallowed instantly by the tension choking the air. Andrew did not rise, did not threaten, did not shout. He simply answered in a low voice, every word striking the cabin walls like a hammer. The man you just tried to remove from his own aircraft. A gasp slipped from one of the passengers. Rebecca's knuckles whitened around her radio. Tyler opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't push a sound through his dry throat. Andrew remained silent for a few more seconds, as if allowing everyone to feel the full weight of the truth. Then he set the phone on the armrest and looked directly at the captain. Run. My name. Just 3 words. But this time, no one dared dismiss them. Captain Pierce immediately turned to Rebecca, his voice trembling ever so slightly. Harlow, give me the boarding list. She forced her tablet open, but the screen stayed frozen. She tried again. Nothing. Tyler grabbed his radio, but it emitted only an error tone. A long electronic beep filled the cabin. Once, twice, then everything went dead. And that was the moment they understood. The system had been disabled. Their authority was gone. Rachel's voice came over the phone like a verdict. Cabin crew access has been revoked by executive directive. All crew devices are now disconnected. The front cabin erupted in horrified murmurs. A man blurted out, "Good Lord, they just locked out the entire crew, mid-flight." A young woman whispered, still recording, "This is going viral. I swear this will be everywhere tonight." Suddenly Rebecca screamed, her voice cracking apart. No, this cannot be happening. We followed protocol." But Andrew cut in, not loudly yet, with a weight that made the entire cabin vibrate. What protocol allows you to tear up a valid ticket? What protocol allows you to belittle a passenger? What protocol allows you to replace truth with prejudice? His voice was too calm, which made it infinitely more powerful than any shouting could have been. Tyler inhaled shakily, clinging to whatever defense he had left. We did not know who you were." Andrew turned toward him, his eyes cold as carved granite. "And if I were no one at all, would you have treated me any better?" The question sliced through the cabin like a blade. Silence struck. A man in row 5 spoke quietly. That is the real issue. Captain Pierce, struggling to salvage what little dignity he had left, said stiffly, "Whoever you are, you cannot threaten the crew using your authority." Andrew rose to his feet, and the moment he stood, the cabin seemed to tilt, not because of the aircraft, but because the entire balance of power had shifted before their eyes. "I am not threatening," Andrew said clearly. "You and your crew did that first. You misused your authority." "I am simply taking it back," Rachel's voice chimed in for the 3rd time, precise as a bell. "Mr. Cole, the Chief Executive Board, is standing by to receive your report, awaiting your final directive." Rebecca broke into sobs. Tyler stepped back, searching for an escape. Captain Pierce clenched his jaw, his face burning red. Andrew glanced at all 3 of them, not with hatred, but with a profound disappointment, the kind carried by someone who once believed the system he built deserved to represent something better. Rachel Andrew said, not even looking at the phone, knowing the entire boardroom stood behind that single voice. "Pause the flight. Lock out the crew. Prepare replacement personnel." The cabin exploded in a mix of shock and disbelief. Some passengers clapped. Some laughed in stunned amazement. Others panned their cameras across the cabin like they were witnessing a historic moment. Captain Pierce shouted furious, You are disrupting the safe operation of this flight." Andrew turned back slowly, every step shifting the gravity of the room. "No. You did that the moment you disrespected a passenger without evidence." A heavy silence fell sharp as falling metal. Andrew placed a hand on the back of his seat, his voice dropping into a commanding calm. From this moment, I am taking responsibility for this flight." Emily, the young woman who had been recording from the beginning, whispered through a trembling breath, "He's taking back his own sky." Rebecca collapsed into a seat, her eyes wide, as if she finally understood the magnitude of the person she had challenged. Andrew scanned the cabin, his expression no longer angry, but filled with a quiet sorrow, mixed with hope. Hope that after today, everyone on this aircraft would remember one truth, that power is not measured by skin color, wealth, or assumptions. It is measured by truth, and truth had just stood up. Rachel's voice returned one final time. "Confirmed, former crew suspended, replacement personnel in transit." Flight paused. Andrew closed his eyes and drew in a long, deep breath. The sky outside the window remained as blue as ever, but something fundamental had shifted, not only for him, but for every person who had just witnessed the unthinkable unfold. This was only the beginning. The first-class door opened again, not to welcome new passengers, but to let a heavy silence pour in, as if the entire aircraft itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Andrew Cole remained standing, his back straight, his gaze frighteningly calm, while the three suspended crew members huddled in the left corner of the cabin like people dragged into the light after hiding in the shadows for far too long. No more radios, no more authority, no trace of the arrogance they once carried so confidently. Only the naked truth clinging to them like an invisible sentence. A few passengers lowered their phones, not because they feared being told to stop recording, but because they realized they were witnessing something rare, the exact moment when power shifted hands, right before their eyes. Andrew looked directly at Captain Raymond Pierce, a man who once believed that wearing a pilot's uniform automatically granted him the right to impose his will on anyone. Now that uniform was no longer a symbol of power, but a collar tightening around his neck. Mr. Cole Raymond attempted to speak, but his voice cracked each word, blocked by the fear of being exposed. "I didn't know. You do not need to know who I am, Andrew," cut in his voice, soft, yet sharp enough to make Raymond flinch. "You only need to know how to treat people correctly. And you did not." A man in seat 3, Alpha whispered to his wife. "Never seen someone talk to a captain like that," she replied, her eyes locked on Andrew. No captain has ever deserved to hear it more. Behind them, Rebecca Harlow stood with red, swollen eyes, her mascara streaked like ash after a small fire. In her 8 years on the job, she had grown used to being treated as the authority in the cabin, used to passengers lowering their heads, used to believing she had the right to judge who was worthy of sitting in first class. But today, all those habits collapsed into pieces. "I am sorry," she managed her voice, trembling like an overstretched guitar string. Andrew turned toward her, not with anger, not with hatred, but with the tired calm of someone who had endured this kind of thing far too many times in his life. "What exactly are you sorry for?" She choked for being mistaken. Andrew shook his head gently. "No. You are sorry because you believed you had the power to decide who someone is with just one glance." The cabin fell into complete silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of awakening. Tyler Briggs, once the most confident and mocking, now looked like a young man pulled out of the arrogant dream he had been living in. Tyler began, but the words died in his throat. Andrew did not need him to speak. He turned away and swept his eyes across the cabin, where dozens of passengers now looked at him with newfound respect. An older man rose slightly from his seat, steadying himself on the headrest in front of him. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice raspy but strong, "I have flown for many years, seen plenty of bad crew, but I have never seen anyone stand up the way you did." Andrew dipped his head in silent acknowledgement. A young woman, Emily Carter, who had been recording the entire time, stepped forward. "Do give me permission to send this video to the media." Andrew looked at her thoughtful, knowing that if this video reached the internet, it could ignite a major debate across the aviation industry. It could help change the system, but it could also spark a media storm if misunderstood. He considered for a few seconds before saying, "Keep it. When the time is right, I will tell you." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with genuine respect. Outside the cabin door, heavy footsteps approached. The replacement crew, summoned by the chief executive officer's direct order, arrived on board. 2 reserve pilots and 3 new flight attendants entered, their expressions serious still, processing the shock of what had happened only minutes earlier. "Mr. Cole," the new first officer, Daniel Shaw, said, "We have been briefed. The flight will be ready for departure as soon as you confirm." Andrew looked at them, then back at the 3 suspended crew members who now stared downward or into empty space. "You will leave the aircraft," he said, his voice firm, but no longer angry. "Not because I want revenge, but because I cannot allow anyone on this journey to feel they are worth less because of appearance, skin color, or silence," Rebecca sobbed. Tyler turned his face away. Captain Pierce stood rigid like a statue, carved from shame. Andrew did not look at them again. He turned to the new crew. "Make sure my passengers fly safely," he said. "Not just physically safe. Safe from disrespect." Those words landed like a declaration. A cabin camera recorded everything. A young mother held her child tighter, her eyes glistening. An office worker clapped for the first time in his life over something that truly felt right. A college student in row 6 whispered, This is the moment the entire aviation industry changes." Passengers began applauding, not all at once, but one by one then, as a growing wave echoing across the cabin. Andrew did not turn back. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them, his gaze deep, like the sky after a storm clears. He walked back toward seat 1, Charlie, the seat he had been told he did not belong in. But now no one dared question him. No one dared doubt him. No one dared think he did not deserve it. Because now not just that seat, not just this aircraft, but the entire sky belonged to Andrew Cole. He sat down, fastened his seatbelt, and as his eyes drifted toward the window, the evening sky stretched open before him, vast and blue, like a reminder that sometimes, to change an entire system, all it takes is one person willing to stand up, not with shouting, but with truth. When the new crew settled into position and the footsteps of the suspended team faded away from first class, the atmosphere on the aircraft shifted, like a strong wind sweeping out all the dust that had gathered during those tense minutes. But peace did not return instantly. It came slowly, as if the cabin itself were trying to heal the tear that had been ripped open by prejudice and abused authority. Andrew Cole sat quietly, in seat 1 Charlie, his hands interlaced his eyes, fixed not on anyone around him, but on the window, where the sunset painted a thin layer of clouds in soft orange, like silk drifting across the sky. Yet in his gaze there was something different, the silence of a man who had walked through a storm and understood that the storm was never meant for him alone. He was not thinking about victory. He was thinking about the system he now had to repair. In row 3, Emily Carter unlocked her phone, her fingers trembling as she pressed play on the video she had recorded. She watched with reddened eyes, occasionally leaning toward the person beside her, to make sure she was not imagining what she saw. I have never seen anyone stay that calm in the face of such blatant disrespect, she whispered. The man beside her nodded slowly. Maybe because he has lived through worse than any of us. Emily looked toward Andrew, her expression softening, as if she suddenly understood that behind his strength was a long history of endurance. In row 5, a mother cradling her child recounted to her husband that she had seen discrimination at airports before, but never someone who made power bow its head. Our child should grow up knowing this, she said, her eyes still fixed on Andrew. In the cockpit, the reserve crew worked quickly through their checklists to prepare the aircraft for departure once authorization came through. First Officer Daniel Shaw scanned the system board, but his mind kept drifting back to the moment he stepped into first class and saw the chief executive officer commanding a crisis in real time. I have heard stories about him, Daniel said to the new flight attendant Meredith. But today, I think I saw a real legend. Meredith, with only 2 years of experience, swallowed hard. I have never seen a superior suspend an entire crew right on the aircraft. Daniel looked at her, his voice low. That is because no one else would dare, except a man who truly owns the sky. Outside the cabin near the boarding gate, Rebecca Harlow leaned against the wall, her mascara smeared across her pale face, her hands clutching her flight attendant hat. Tyler Briggs sat collapsed beside her elbows on his knees, his face buried in his palms. "We lost everything," Tyler murmured. Rebecca turned to him, her voice breaking. Why did we act like that? Why Tyler gripped his hair and let out a strangled groan. Because we thought we had power. Because we thought he was nobody. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling as if every layer of arrogance she had worn for years had been ripped off, leaving behind nothing but a small, fragile person with nothing left to hide behind. Inside the cabin, Andrew finally turned from the window and looked at each passenger, as if memorizing their faces, the witnesses not just to his truth, but to the truth of the entire aviation industry. He touched his phone lightly and spoke to Rachel, his voice lower, deeper, heavy with reflection. "Update the board. After this flight, we are holding an emergency meeting. What happened today is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a much bigger illness." Rachel responded immediately. "Understood, sir. I will prepare the documentation." Andrew nodded slightly, but he did not end the call. "Rachel," he continued, his voice calm but weighted, "review every report of discrimination involving cabin crews over the past 3 years. Do not overlook anyone." "Yes, sir." A long exhale slipped from Andrew, soft enough that only Emily in row 3 heard it. She put her phone away and approached him gently, as if afraid to disturb him. "Mr. Cole," she whispered. Andrew looked up. "Thank you," she said, no elaboration, no hesitation, only 3 simple words carrying thousands of emotions. Andrew studied her for a moment, as if seeing in her eyes a reflection of himself at 20, when he was first turned away because of how he looked. "Thank you," he replied quietly, "for not turning away." Emily smiled and returned to her seat, her heart still pounding from witnessing the strength of the man who had stood up for everyone who had ever been denied a voice. First Officer Daniel Shaw stepped out of the cockpit and stood at the front of the cabin. His voice carried firmly through the aisle. "Ladies and gentlemen, the replacement crew is fully ready. We will be taking off in a few minutes. Thank you for your patience." Applause rippled through the cabin, not loud at first, but gradually growing, spreading like waves hitting the side of a ship. But this time, it was not applause for departure. It was applause for what they had just lived through, a small revolution on an aircraft still sitting on the ground. Andrew leaned his head back. He did not see himself as a hero. He had not done this for admiration. He had done it because he knew too many people like him had sat in seats just like this one without ever getting the chance to stand up. He did it because he understood that his responsibility extended far beyond what he owned. And as the aircraft began to roll, the wheels humming beneath them, the engines rising in a low crescendo, Andrew looked out the window once more. He did not see the sky. He saw the future. A future where a seat would no longer determine someone's worth. A future where the voice of truth would no longer be silenced by fear. And as the plane accelerated, leaving the ground behind, Andrew Cole slowly closed his eyes and let the sky swallow his final thought. Today was not just the day he reclaimed his first-class seat. Today was the day he reclaimed the sky for everyone who had ever been told they did not belong there. When the aircraft climbed into stable air, the lights in first class softened, leaving a warm, golden glow across the faces of passengers who were still shaken by everything they had just witnessed. The sound of the engines thrummed steadily like a heartbeat, settling after a shock, but inside, many of them, emotions still swirled like a storm that had yet to fade. Andrew Cole remained seated in one, Charlie his back resting against the cushion, but his eyes fixed on the night sky slowly spreading outside the window. The lights of small towns below were only scattered specks, flickering faintly beneath the vast darkness, and that sight reminded him of all the people who had once been just like him, lonely specks buried under layers of quiet, nameless prejudice. Andrew did not smile, nor did he feel triumphant. His expression held the calm of someone who understood that this was not a final victory, but the beginning of a much larger fight. Beside him, a new flight attendant, Meredith, approached, with a gentle voice, still trembling from the earlier chaos. "Mr. Cole," she whispered, "would you like some water?" Andrew turned toward her, his gaze always making people feel seen without being judged. "Thank you," he said, taking the glass. Meredith bowed her head and stepped back, trying to maintain her professional composure despite the mix of admiration and nerves she could not hide. In row 4, a middle-aged man, James Patterson, stared at Andrew for a long time before leaning toward his wife, speaking just loudly enough for her to hear. "He did not just protect us. He protected everyone who will come after." His wife replied softly, her voice tightening. "It is strange. I have never seen someone with so much power be that calm. Usually people with power are the ones most afraid to stand up." James squeezed her hand, both seeking and offering understanding, in a rare moment of raw humanity, on a flight that had been torn open by truth. Meanwhile, Emily Carter sat behind them, deep in thought, her eyes fixed on Andrew, as if seeing in him living proof that dignity never comes from being validated by others, but from refusing to let anyone strip it away. She opened her phone, looked at the video she recorded, and what surprised her most was not the confrontation itself, but Andrew's composure in every minute, every second. Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did he try to overpower anyone. Not once did he demand fear. She murmured to herself, This is how someone truly strong behaves." In the cockpit, First Officer Daniel Shaw watched Andrew through the cabin camera. You see that he said to the new captain, Lena Hopkins. That is why people like him run an entire airline, and we only fly the planes. Captain Hopkins nodded slowly, her tone steady, but carrying a trace of awe. I think I finally understand why the board trusts him so completely. The flight continued in gentle silence, but in one corner of the cabin something else was quietly unfolding. A young man in row 2, Brandon Ellis, typed on his phone rapidly. He was not recording or taking photos. He was messaging friends, family co-workers. Something huge just happened on this plane, he wrote. I watched a chief executive officer suspend an entire crew right in front of us. But what shocked me more is he was right. Completely right. The message spread from person to person, story to story, not because it was sensational, but because it carried something. People had been waiting far too long for justice. A few rows back, the young mother holding her sleeping child whispered almost to herself, My kid has to grow up in a different world, one where things like today do not happen anymore. Her husband nodded, eyes shining with a resolve he did not know he had. I think he just did something an entire industry failed to do for decades. And Andrew, though he didn't hear their words, felt the same weight settling onto him in the rhythm of the cabin around him. All of it pressed on him like a responsibility, heavier than the aircraft, carrying hundreds of lives through the sky. He slid his phone back into his vest pocket and closed his eyes for a brief moment. In that quiet second, he remembered his mother teaching him how to live, how to rise without harming others, how to keep his dignity when the world tried to take it away. Wherever you go, whoever stands before you, she once told him, remember this. You do not need to shout to be heard. You only need to speak with truth. Andrew opened his eyes, and everything sharpened again. As the aircraft prepared for descent, the cabin lights brightened once more, but this time they were not cold or distant, like at the beginning of the flight. They felt warmer, more human, as if the airplane itself were exhaling after holding its breath too long. Captain Hopkins made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to land. Thank you for your patience and respect throughout this journey. Emily fastened her seatbelt, her gaze still on Andrew, carrying a strange sense of reverence, as if she had witnessed something larger than an incident. She had witnessed a moment when people chose to stand on the side of what was right. When the wheels touched the ground, the soft jolt rippled through the cabin, but to many passengers, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter. Andrew looked out the window as the airport lights streaked across the glass. He knew this was only the beginning. Reports, meetings, internal reforms, all waiting ahead of him. But as the plane slowed down, Andrew exhaled deeply, steady and quiet. Today at least he had done what had to be done. When the aircraft came to a full stop, another round of applause began this time, not loud or chaotic, but filled with gratitude. Andrew stood, adjusted his vest, and stepped out of first class with the bearing of a man who not only owned the sky, but knew how to return its light to those who had long been kept in the shadows. As the aircraft door opened, the cool air from the jet bridge swept into the cabin like a long exhale from the sky after a storm. Passengers slowly rose from their seats, each one glancing at Andrew Cole before stepping out, as if committing the image of the man who had turned a flight into a moral lesson they would retell for years. Their eyes carried every emotion, respect, pride, admiration, and a quiet sense of gratitude. No one spoke loudly, but each whispered, "Thank you." Andrew returned only a slight nod. Not boastful, not triumphant, simply the calm acknowledgement of a man who had finished a necessary repair rather than a victor celebrating a conquest. But the moment he stepped into the jet bridge, that calm dissolved instantly. Two men in black suits, the Sky West Atlantic badges gleaming on their chests, were waiting at the end of the hallway. One was Martin Hale, the West Region Chief Operating Officer. The other was Sean Weller, Head of Aviation Security. The instant Andrew approached, both men straightened their posture, adjusted their ties, and bowed deeply enough for the passengers behind them to gasp. Mr. Cole Martin Hale began. "We have been fully briefed. The Executive Board is holding an emergency session and requests your presence in the conference room immediately upon exiting the jet bridge." Andrew nodded. "Good. The sooner the better." Sean stepped forward, his formal tone unable to mask his indignation on the CEO's behalf. "We have confiscated the security IDs, work permits and uniforms of the suspended crew. They are being held in a private room according to protocol." Andrew glanced at him, and that single look made Sean step back half a pace, because in Andrew's eyes was the sternness of a man who had witnessed too many violations to be lenient. "Do not harm them," Andrew said. "Separate them and keep them quiet. Every decision will be based on investigation, not emotion." Martin and Sean nodded firmly. That was what they respected most about Andrew. He never let anger dictate his actions, even when he had every right to. When Andrew stepped into the terminal, dozens of phone lights pointed toward him, like tiny stars lining the long hallway. No one rushed up for autographs. No one asked for photos. No one tried to crowd him. They simply stood aside, forming an invisible corridor for him to walk through. A few placed their hands over their hearts, offering the quietest form of gratitude. A little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, who is he?" Her mother leaned down, holding her close. "He is the man who just made airplanes safer for everyone." After passing through the crowd, Andrew was escorted to the airport's emergency conference room, a large glass-walled space overlooking the runway, shimmering under the nightlights. Inside, 7 senior Sky West Atlantic officials were already waiting. On the large screen at the end of the table, 3 conference feeds were active: the chairwoman of the board, the chief of human resources, and the senior legal advisor. The moment Andrew entered, everyone stood at once. But he simply motioned with his hand. "Sit. We do not have much time." Chairwoman Elaine Carver spoke first. Andrew listened to the cabin recording. Nothing like this has ever happened in the airline's history. Andrew took his seat with a heavy exhale. This did not begin today. It has been building 4 years. Today was only the moment it broke open. Human Resources Director Harlan Reed opened a thick folder. "We found 47 complaints involving the former crew over the past 4 years, all marked as insufficient evidence." Andrew let out a cold, hollow smile. Insufficient evidence, or insufficient courage to confront the truth. A dense silence fell across the room. Sean, who had entered, last placed a sealed evidence bag on the table. "These are the initial statements from the suspended crew. They claim they were following protocol." Andrew leaned back, eyes narrowing. Which protocol instructs them to tear a valid ticket? Which protocol allows them to accuse a passenger of fraud without verifying identity? Which protocol empowers them to remove someone from first class simply because they do not fit a certain appearance? No one answered. They all knew the truth. There was no protocol, only prejudice and abused authority. Martin Hale spoke next, his voice slightly trembling. "Mr. Cole, your decision to suspend them was correct. But do you intend to proceed with immediate termination or wait for the internal investigation? Andrew closed his eyes for a brief moment. Images from the flight flashed through his mind. Emily's trembling eyes, fear, injustice, and the silent suffering he himself had endured as a younger man. Then, the image of his mother, who had always taught him to choose the right path, not the easy one. When he opened his eyes, his voice was steady as a verdict. "I am not seeking revenge. I am seeking justice." He paused. "Conduct a full internal investigation. Thorough, transparent, public." The legal advisor nodded, and once the findings are confirmed, Andrew looked directly at the screen, his voice steel. Termination, license revocation, and placement on the no-hire list across the aviation industry. A soft gasp came from someone at the far end of the table. Harlan Reed hesitated. "Andrew, are you certain this means they will never work in aviation again?" "Exactly," Andrew replied. "If they are willing to humiliate passengers, destroy valid tickets, threaten insult, and abuse authority in the sky, they are not worthy of protecting anyone's safety." The air in the room tightened, not because his words were harsh, but because they were undeniably true. Elaine Carver pressed her lips together, then nodded decisively. "Very well. I will sign the resolution." In that moment, Andrew did not feel relieved. He felt a quiet ache, the ache of a man forced to repair the very house he built. The meeting continued for another half hour. Once everything was finalized, Andrew rose. Before leaving, he turned and spoke a single sentence that made the entire room go still. "After today, SkyWest Atlantic will no longer just be my airline. It must become an airline worthy of every person who steps on board." When he stepped out of the conference room, the glass walls reflected the image of a man who did not crumble under injustice, did not choose silence in the face of prejudice, and never used his power to retaliate. He walked straight toward the terminal, where the night sky opened like a vast door. And in that moment, Andrew Cole understood that this battle was far from over, but he also knew he would see it through, because a safe sky must always begin with one person willing to stand up. And today, he had opened the way. Leaving the emergency meeting room, Andrew Cole stepped into the long terminal hallway, washed in warm yellow light, where streams of travelers continued moving, as if unaware that just a few dozen meters behind them, a reform powerful enough to shake the entire aviation industry had begun. But Andrew knew, and he felt it in every steady heartbeat inside his chest. As he walked, airport employees froze when they saw him pass. Some recognized him, some did not, but all sensed the weight he carried, a presence as heavy as the sky itself. No one dared interrupt. No one dared question. They simply stepped aside and bowed slightly, not out of fear, but out of respect. Andrew reached the VIP lounge area, intending to take a few quiet minutes to gather his thoughts before leaving the airport. But what he did not expect was a small group of passengers from the earlier flight waiting for him there. Emily Carter was the first to approach, her eyes still red from the emotional storm they had just lived through. "Mr. Cole," she said softly but firmly, "we wanted to thank you one last time before you leave." Andrew stopped tilting his head as he looked at the group standing neatly, as if awaiting a solemn moment. An elderly man in his 70s stood straight despite leaning on a cane. A young mother held her child, her eyes filled with relief. A group of students hovered shyly, their eyes glowing with conviction. They all stepped toward Andrew. "You did what we couldn't," the older man said first. "You proved that no one has the right to insult another person Because of how they look, Andrew replied gently. I only did what was right. No, the man shook his head. You did what was right, when what was right was not easy. Emily stepped closer, gripping her phone tightly. Mr. Cole, I know this video could cause chaos. I will not post it. But if you ever want to, whenever you are ready, Andrew looked at her for a long moment, then offered a rare, small smile, the kind people claimed they hardly ever saw on the CEO's face. Thank you, Emily. Keep it. I will know when the time is right. He glanced at the group, feeling their trust, their respect, and the hope they placed in him. And for the first time that night, Andrew truly understood that what he did on board had not only changed the fate of 3 suspended crew members, nor just the airline's protocols, but the way these people viewed the world. It had changed the way they viewed themselves. Andrew bowed slightly in gratitude and continued walking toward the executive exit. But just as he approached the security zone, his phone vibrated. The caller's name flashed Rachel Donovan. Andrew answered instantly. Rachel, sir, I have a new report from the cabin behavior oversight team, Rachel said quickly, her sharp voice lower than usual, as if she, too, recognized the gravity of what she had uncovered. What is it? Andrew asked, stopping mid-stride in the hallway. You were not the only target of this crew. There are at least 16 previous reports, and many more labeled as insufficient evidence. Andrew closed his eyes, a tight pressure rising in his chest. They knew this for years. Yes, sir, Rachel replied, tension in every word. Some supervisors hid files. Some omissions were intentional. And worse, there are signs a portion of the cabin staff developed a toxic internal culture, encouraging filtering passengers by their own standards. Andrew opened his eyes, the pupils dark with anger and an unspoken ache. A toxic internal culture, he repeated slowly, grinding each word. On my aircraft. Rachel was silent for a few seconds before asking, Sir, what do you want me to do? Andrew tightened his grip on the phone. This is not just a few individuals, he said, his voice deep as a drumbeat. This may be an entire system. He stepped into the private operations room, reserved for the CEO at the airport. The glass door closed behind him, and inside the real storm began. Rachel, Andrew said, his tone sharp as steel. I want a full investigation of the entire cabin division. Flight attendants, supervisors, lead staff, regional managers, everyone. Yes, sir. I want recruitment data from the past 10 years, performance evaluations, complaint records, body cam footage, witness statements, shift assignments. I want to know exactly what has been hidden. Rachel did not ask why. She did not ask if it was too much. She did not ask whether it would shake the entire airline. She asked only one question. How soon? Andrew answered without hesitation. Start immediately. Do not wait for sunrise. Rachel exhaled softly, as if releasing the weight of the night. I will begin right away. The call ended. Andrew stood alone in the bright white room, his shadow stretching long across the floor. But he did not feel alone. He felt himself standing at the crossroads of 2 paths, one shaped by the prejudice that had followed him all his life, and one shaped by the future he would build from tonight. And he knew that from this moment on, his journey had moved beyond that flight. It had entered a new battle, a battle for those without a voice, for those pushed out of their seats, for those told they did not belong. Andrew turned his eyes glowing with an unbreakable resolve. If the sky wants to test me, he said to himself, I will show it. I was born to fly. And in that moment, Andrew Cole was no longer merely the CEO of Sky West Atlantic. He became the voice that would lead the way, and the sky itself seemed to be waiting for him to rewrite its rules. Night had fully descended when Andrew Cole stepped out of Westbridge International Airport, the darkness so deep that every streetlight seemed to float like a golden star against a velvet sky. But inside his mind, there was no quiet at all. The words, the looks, the actions from the flight looped over and over, like a film refusing to stop forcing him to confront the truth that the problem did not end in a first-class cabin, did not end with 3 suspended employees, but ran deep through the very machinery of the airline he had spent half his life building. The executive car waited with its door open, but Andrew raised a hand. "I will drive." He did not want to be trapped in the back seat, did not want silence too soon, did not want anyone to intrude on the storm of thoughts crashing inside him. He sat in the driver's seat and closed the door, the metal clicking shut like a sharp exhale. As the vehicle sped down the highway, the streetlights drew bright streaks across the windshield, and Andrew drifted into the darkness between each slash of light. Every dark patch was a memory, every beam of light a reminder. At 8 years old, a mall security guard told him to leave the VIP lounge area, even while he clung tightly to his mother's hand. "This section is not for children like you," the man said, and his mother sighed, but did not argue, simply walked him out. At 19, a low-end airline clerk questioned his ability to purchase a business-class ticket because he did not look like someone who could afford it. At 35, a 5-star hotel demanded to verify his credit card in front of a full lobby simply because he did not arrive with a parade of assistants like the wealthy white executives around him. And now, at 46, he saw the same shadows again in the faces of Rebecca Tyler and Captain Pierce. Andrew tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I let it go for too long," he muttered under his breath, as if scolding himself. When the car turned onto the road leading toward his home, the mansion appeared under warm golden lights. But Andrew did not pull into the garage. He sat in the driveway, switched off the engine, leaned back and closed his eyes. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to feel the hurt, the anger, the disappointment, trembling inside his chest. The silence did not last long, because his phone vibrated. Rachel Donovan again. Andrew answered his voice, mildly hoarse. "Speak," Rachel inhaled sharply, as if she had run down a hallway. "Mr. Cole, we found additional evidence." Andrew straightened. What kind of evidence? I received an audio recording from an internal training session led by a cabin manager 2 years ago. Rachel's voice dropped thick with outrage. "So you need to hear this." A click sounded, then a man's voice in the recording. "We must maintain Sky West Atlantic standards," he said, confidently smugly. "Not everyone who buys a first-class seat deserves to sit in it." "Trust your instincts," a woman asked. "Do you mean we are allowed to refuse them?" The man chuckled under his breath. "Just write, 'suspected fraud' in the report. No one investigates that." Andrew's eyes snapped open, darkening. "Continue." Rachel played another clip. A younger male voice said, "Yesterday I saw a black passenger who looked like a rapper. I moved him to economy immediately." A female voice giggled. "Good. Those types do not fit business class." Andrew clenched his jaw so hard the muscles locked. His heartbeat pounded fury, pulsing through every nerve. "Rachel." His voice was deep and sharp, like an axe splitting wood. "We are going to destroy this culture. I will not let it live one more day. Rachel answered without hesitation. "I follow your order." Andrew ended the call. The phone felt like stone in his hand. He stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward his brightly lit home. In that moment, he thought of his mother. Of her words, "Real strength is when you protect those who have no one standing beside them." Andrew paused at the door, his hand resting on the cold metal handle. "I am still doing what you taught me, Mom," he whispered. When he opened the door, the quiet house welcomed him like a refuge. But tonight he did not head for the warm living room or the library filled with books. He walked straight into his office, switched on the lights, pulled out his chair and opened his laptop. His reflection stared back at him from the screen, resolute, exhausted, but unshaken. He began typing. Cabin Culture Reform Plan Emergency Priority. Each line he wrote felt like a hammer striking the foundation of a new airline. Eliminate invisible standards. Establish an Equity Oversight Council. Mandatory anti-bias training. Randomized compliance checks. Full cabin camera coverage. Passenger protection protocol against authority misuse. Permanent disqualification for discriminatory conduct. Andrew's eyes sharpened with renewed fire as he typed each word. A final period landed. He reviewed the entire document and sent it directly to every board member and senior executive. Subject line, effective tonight. After hitting send, Andrew leaned back and closed his eyes. He did not smile, but there was a flicker at the corner of his mouth, something resembling pride, not because he was the CEO, but because he had just laid the first brick of a different future for every passenger who had ever been like him. Somewhere outside, the sky was still dark, but Andrew Cole knew one thing: the dawn of a new airline was coming. And this time, no one would have their ticket torn apart, simply because someone believed they did not belong. No one. Not ever again. Before dawn could cast its light over the city, Andrew Cole's office was already glowing, not with the calm of a new morning, but with the fire of a battle beginning. He stood by the window holding a cup of dark coffee. He had not taken a single sip of his eyes, fixed on the empty streets below. There was something in the quiet of the city that made him feel the weight of responsibility even more sharply. It was no longer last night's anger, but a sharpened determination, cold and clear, forged through decades of enduring and overcoming discrimination. His phone chimed, pulling him from his thoughts. Rachel had emailed at 4:52 in the morning, attaching a list of 52 cabin crew members identified as directly or indirectly involved in documented incidents of discrimination. "Sir, I think you need to see this immediately." Andrew opened the file. Every name, every position, every red-marked note with evidence gathered from cameras, passenger statements, internal reports. As he scrolled through the list, it felt like a blade twisting in his chest. Not because the truth was cruel, but because it had existed for far too long without him seeing it. 40, 50, 52. He murmured, his face tightening with each number. How many more? He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. The system showed a flood of emails from the executive team, titled "Requesting Direction, Awaiting Orders, Prepared for Action." But what caught his attention was an internal message from a young flight attendant. "Mr. Cole, thank you. My cabin supervisor has been mistreating me for 2 years. I thought I was not good enough. But what you did made me believe I was not wrong." That message made Andrew lean back in his chair and inhale deeply. Last night he fought for himself, but this morning he knew he was no longer fighting alone. He was fighting for those who had never had a voice. Andrew turned on speakerphone, and called Rachel. We act now. Not when business hours start. Rachel replied instantly, her voice sharp and alert, as if she had been awake beside him all night. I have assembled the legal team Human Resources, Regional Oversight and Training Division. Everyone is in the main conference room. Good, Andrew said. I am on my way. 17 minutes later, Andrew stepped into the SkyWest Atlantic headquarters, the glass tower reflecting the rising dawn like a giant bird spreading its wings. The main lobby was lit brightly, and the security staff stood as he entered, their expressions a mix of seriousness and respect. Good morning, Mr. Cole. Andrew nodded and walked straight to the private elevator. The doors opened onto the strategy floor where the room was already filled. Everyone rose the moment he stepped in. Andrew did not ask them to stand. They did it because they understood this was a day of transformation, and only one person could lead them through it. He placed the documents on the table and did not waste time. Let us begin. The room fell silent. I reviewed all 52 names. Andrew said, his voice low but piercing, as if each person in the room felt directly addressed. And that is only the surface of the iceberg. Human Resources Director Harlan Reed clasped his hands and sighed. I cannot believe the scale of this issue. Andrew looked at him, his gaze sharp as a blade. You cannot believe it, or you did not want to believe it. Harlan lowered his head, silent. Andrew continued. We allowed a toxic culture to grow quietly, pushing passengers into fear and employees into silence. This is not the failure of a few people. This is a failure of an entire system. Training Director Lillian Grant frowned. Mr. Cole, what do you want us to do first? Investigate, suspend people en masse? Andrew shook his head. No. The first thing we do is face our employees with honesty. Operations Chief Hale asked, what will you say to them? Andrew answered without hesitation. The truth. And then he laid out the plan, step by step precise, like a general outlining the strategy before a decisive battle. First, announce the reform across the entire company. Second, open a confidential reporting line for employees monitored directly by myself and Rachel. Third, immediately suspend anyone directly involved. Fourth, start a full investigation at every level. Fifth, build a mandatory retraining program on equity communication and professional conduct. Sixth, restructure the entire cabin division. The room stirred as if awakened. Lillian gasped. Mr. Cole, if we push this hard, there will be people who resist, people who fight you. Andrew looked at her with calm, unwavering eyes. If they resist justice, they do not belong in this airline. Silence stretched across the room. Then slowly, the expressions around the table shifted from uncertainty to determination. Andrew sensed it, and he knew it was time to speak the words that would become the compass for the entire organization. SkyWest Atlantic is not an airline for the wealthy, nor for the powerful. It is an airline for every passenger who steps onto our aircraft. And anyone who does not understand that will have to leave. Rachel looked at Andrew, her eyes filled with profound respect. For the first time in her entire career, she saw a CEO who led not only with intelligence, but with humanity. The meeting lasted 2.5 hours, and when it ended, when everyone understood that what was coming would change the airline's history forever, Andrew stood and looked around the room. From today onward, he said, we are not simply correcting the past. We are creating a new standard. The entire room rose, not to leave but to applaud. A soft, powerful applause, like the engines of a brand new aircraft coming to life. And Andrew, though he did not smile, knew with certainty that he had just placed the system on the runway. and with only one more step, the aircraft named Justice would finally lift off. When the meeting ended, Andrew Cole stood before the glass wall of the top floor, looking down at the long runway where the aircraft lay still, waiting for clearance to rise into the sky. The early sunlight filtered through the glass, creating a halo around him, making the CEO's silhouette resemble a steadfast pillar in a moment that marked the turning point of an entire system. He was not thinking about victory nor power, but about every person who had ever had their ticket torn, been denied or forced to step off a plane because they did not look the part. Faces that had blurred into memory resurfaced one by one, as if the sky itself were reminding him why this revolution had to begin. At that moment, Rachel entered, holding a tablet loaded with the status of ongoing tasks. All departments have received the directives she reported. The anonymous hotline has already received more than 30 reports in just 1 hour. Andrew nodded, his eyes darkening with a cold clarity. Good. It means they have been waiting for this chance for a long time. Rachel set the tablet down and looked at him with visible admiration. Mr. Cole, I have never seen a COO confront a crisis by walking straight into the center of it. Andrew gave a faint smile, soft as the breeze beyond the glass. I do not walk in because I am a CEO. I walk in because I have lived through those moments. He turned toward her, then toward the empty meeting room behind them, the place that only hours ago had been the battleground of opinions, confessions, and outrage. If an airline cannot protect the dignity of its passengers, Andrew said slowly, then it does not deserve to take off. Rachel drew in a deep breath, as if his words clarified the weight of her own responsibilities. The morning flight has departed, she informed him. The new crew reported that passengers keep mentioning you. They say you returned the sky to them. Andrew looked down at an aircraft turning off the runway, his gaze distant, yet unwavering. The sky does not belong to me, he said. It belongs to everyone who steps into it, hoping to be treated fairly. He walked toward the long corridor leading to the private elevator, each step echoing with a firmness that signaled the reform was no longer an idea, but a path he would walk without turning back. When the elevator doors opened, Andrew paused for a moment before the mirror inside, staring at the man reflected back. Not the COO, not the largest shareholder, not someone applauded or celebrated, but a man carrying a heart strong enough to fight for those who did not have the power to protect themselves. The sky will change, he said softly, just loud enough for himself to hear. And I will be the one who rewrites its rules. The elevator doors closed, and Andrew Cole's new journey officially began, the journey of a man who was not merely running an airline, but leading an entire generation of employees, passengers, and everyday people into a new era where justice was not found on a first-class ticket, but in how a system treated every human being. Outside, the sky remained blue, wide, and open, but from this day forward it was already different, because now it belonged to those who deserved it. And Andrew Cole was only getting started. From the perspective of an expert in system governance and organizational culture, Andrew Cole's story is not merely an in-flight confrontation. It is proof that every organization has two skies, the sky outside, where airplanes travel, and the sky within, where human values are tested. An airline may own advanced technology and a powerful fleet, but if it fails to protect the dignity of each passenger, that system will eventually plunge into its own turbulence. What Andrew did was not an exhibition of power, but a demonstration that justice exists only when a leader dares to confront what is broken within his own ranks. And that is what transforms an entire industry, beginning with a single moment. If you believe human dignity should always come first, make sure to like and subscribe so you can follow more inspiring stories of justice like this one. And do not forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "Justice served," so we know you stand on the side of what is right.